possible to have faith in God through the knowledge of good and evil. Because once sin and death got planted into the earth and the knowledge of good and evil is in the earth, right, what happens then is you judge God through the knowledge of what you see and whether it's good or evil. Mm-hmm. If you see evil, then you're judging God, right, based on what you see. If you think you see good, you're judging God based on what you see. And then you look at yourself and you think the same thing. Sure. And that's really what the devil wanted to do, was he wanted to paint a picture of God in our heart that was based on the knowledge of good and evil. Because if he could do that, we would never be able to actually trust him with our life. Right. We'd never actually be able to believe in him. If we didn't see him as Father, if we didn't see him as the Good Samaritan, if we didn't see that he could only ever be good to us, that he never turned his back on us, if we didn't see that he wasn't the one that had beaten and bloodied us and left us on the road, then we would never be able to believe in him. Mm-hmm. And so what the serpent did is he come and beat us and bloodied us and left us on the road to die. And then he convinced us God did it to us because of our disobedience. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And then he got us to judge ourselves by the knowledge of good and evil. And once sin entered the world, sin found an opportunity to manifest itself in our bodies through death and the fruit of death. Mm-hmm. And so all day long, all we could see coming out of ourselves was death and darkness, which is evil. Right. So we judged ourselves to be evil in the eyes of God, meaning the rejected of God, the forsaken of God. We're not the children of God. God hasn't claimed us as his own. God won't save us. God doesn't love us. He's not for us. Right. And once he could get us to think like that, the end result of that's going to be us trying to have life through our own works, right? Yeah. And not being able to trust in God, even if we wanted to. Even if we could come up with a thought in our head that said, man, it sure would be nice if we could trust that guy. We'd never find the ability to do it, right? And so what God did was he sent his heart to the earth so we could see his heart, right? He come and plopped it down on the table because we didn't know him as Father, and we didn't know the way he would respond to us. We didn't see what he saw. We didn't see his eyes popping out of his head with the hearts like a cartoon. Boing, boing, boing. We didn't see him looking at us that way. Right. I mean, we saw him looking at us with like a stretched out head, like angry and ready to kill. That's how we saw. It's kind of like the message about finding life that I talked about. That God's face was shining in adoration towards us, but that shining, we didn't think it was adoration. We thought it was anger. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so his face is shining in adoration, but because we're judging ourselves by the knowledge of good and evil, we can't imagine how he could be filled with adoration towards us. Yeah. We can only imagine how he could be filled with anger towards us. Look at our body of death. Yeah. Oh, wretched man that I am. Right? Mm-hmm. That's the cry of Adam. Oh, wretched man that I am. Mm-hmm. Who can love me? Right? Yeah. Who could want me? Who could even be for me? And so what happened is God saw the problem. Ezekiel says that God's going to sanctify his name. So then God comes and he takes what's in his heart about human and what he wants to do with human and what he thinks and feels about human and what they mean to him, and he plops it out on the table in Jesus. So we could see it all differently now. Yeah. Right? So we could begin to see God as Father. And so that we could find our hearts gravitating towards him, calling out to him, crying out to him, believing in him. And so Jesus becomes us. He becomes a guy who is dead in sin. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Now, we concluded that we were dead in sin because of God doing it to us because of our disobedience. Right? Yeah. God's doing all this death we're experiencing. It's God killing us because of our sin. Right? That's how we saw it. So now here comes a guy who is us. We can see ourselves in him. He's a human. His name's Jesus. He takes our sin and death upon himself. Now he's dead in sin. And Isaiah says, we esteemed him smitten and stricken of God. But he was carrying our grievances. What does that mean? It means we're the ones that smote and struck him. And if you go read Acts, Peter says it just to him. He says, of whom you crucified. He talked about you did this to him. Yeah. He didn't talk about how God did that to him. Right. So we see a guy dead in sin, naked, all the shame of the world upon him, and we conclude the same things about him that we had concluded about ourselves. He's the rejected of God. Yeah. Look at this guy. He's the forsaken of God. God hates this guy. He's the smitten and stricken of God. Because that's what we saw about ourselves. Now, we needed to see that that wasn't the truth. We needed to see that when we were dead in sin, we weren't dead in sin because of God. The death that we had wasn't God. And we needed to see that even in that place of being dead in sin, God still called us His. He still claimed us as His own. He wasn't the one that beat and bloodied us and left us on the road. Jesus comes and says, what? It's the thief that steals, kills, and destroys. We thought God was the one that was stealing and killing and destroying us. You can't trust a guy if you think he's stealing, killing, and destroying.
That's right.
Your life.
Yeah.
You can't. So if every time death manifests, you think it's because God's giving it to you because of your sin, listen, man, you're never going to trust that guy. You're going to think, how can I get the hell away from that guy? Rather just let me return to the dust of the ground. At least that way I don't have to suffer any more death.
Right.
Right? Like Job's wife said to him, just curse God and die.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so Jesus reveals that God isn't the one that smites and strikes us. He's not the one who leaves us beaten and bloody on the road. God wasn't the one that beat and bloodied Jesus on the road. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, who's the one that did the beating and the bloodying? The thief. Doesn't it say the thief?
Yeah.
Well, then how do we say that's God?
Yeah.
The thief is the serpent. Right? So Jesus reveals, this death I'm dying on the cross, I'm you. This is your death. This death isn't at the hands of God, it's at the hands of the thief. And so now, God's not the one giving us the death. So now we see God's not the one giving us the death. But then we see something beyond that. We see God, not just that God isn't the one giving us the death, we see God come and claim the guy who's dead in sin.
Right.
And claim him as his own and pick him up and shine in adoration towards him and love him and save him and heal him and clothe him and fill him with wine. That's the Spirit. Right. Fill him with wine and make a place for him to dwell in his house. We see God's the Good Samaritan. And the way God responds when He finds a guy beaten on the road is He doesn't leave him there.
Right.
He picks him up and He brushes him off and He gives him wine. And then He still doesn't leave him. He brings him to His house. And He makes a place for him to dwell there with Him for all eternity. And so Jesus revealed, this is the true God. This is the one true God. And so that's what Jesus is talking about in John 17, where He says, glorify me that I may glorify you. Reveal the truth about me and what you believe about me and what you intend to do with my life. And then that will reveal the truth about you and your heart towards humans. Because I'm a human, you've given me authority over all flesh. Because I'm a human, whatever is seen in me can be spoken to all humans. And so when all humans see what you think about me, when I'm hanging on the cross, dead in sin, when I have my beard plucked out, when I have the crown of thorns, when I have the robe yanked off of me and I'm hanging there naked, what will happen is they'll see what's in your heart for me, even when I'm dead in sin. They'll see what your intentions are towards me, even when I'm dead in sin. They'll see that I take your breath away. They'll see that your face shines in adoration of me. They'll see that I'm your treasure.
Yes.
And then when they see that that's how you feel about me, they'll see themselves in me. And then they'll see that's how you feel about them. That's what you intend to do with them. That's how you've always felt for them. That's what you've always intended to do with them. Their sin has never stood in your way. Our sin has never changed what God intended to do with our lives.
Right. Absolutely.
Our sin never changed the adoration that the Father had for us. It never changed His desire to live eternally with us.
Right.
And so Jesus comes and God reveals what He believes about a human being with sin and death on him. This human being will just cry out to me. Then all of a sudden we say, oh wait, I was dead in sin. That guy was dead in sin. Oh, I see what God thought about that guy even when he was dead in sin. I see what He intended to do with that guy even when he is dead in sin, because He came and raised him up from the dead. That's the evidence that He calls this guy His son. This guy who's dead in sin. All this guy did was cry out to God, Father. And so then we see God revealed. That's what it means for God to be glorified. It means for the truth about something to be seen. And so Jesus revealed the truth about God being the Good Samaritan and not being the thief on the cross and in the resurrection. And so now we can see the heart of God for what it really is. And we can find ourselves in every situation, no matter how wretched we think we are, no matter how bad we think the fruit in our life is, we can find ourselves knowing that that guy has drawn near to us and he's not ashamed to stand with us. Right?
Yeah.
And then our hearts are, Abba, this fruit in my life is not from you, it's the fruit of death.
Yeah.
Abba, do you see?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really when you'll start experiencing the love of God, when you start to see the heart of God for you, even while you were dead in your sin.
Well, and that's also an explanation as to why Jesus came in the flesh to earth that you don't hear at Christmas time. You know, that you don't hear that anywhere. That Jesus came to show us the Father's heart towards who he was and towards who we are.
Yeah, how can he show us the Father's heart towards us unless he could become everything we were?
Right. Exactly. That's
Right?
huge.
We had to be able to see how would this guy respond to us.
Right.
And we had to be able to see it from the outside looking in. Because nobody could believe in God, right? To that degree.
Right.
And so this guy had to do that. Now we see all of that in him. We see, oh, God's the good Samaritan. Oh, he's not the thief. Oh, God's the Father. He's not taskmaster. He's not Pharaoh.
Yeah.
God's not Pharaoh. We've all thought of God as if he was Pharaoh.
Sure.
As if he says, here's the fruit of the Spirit. Now here's some brick and mortar and straw. Go bring it forth.
That's so good.
Some people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, but Greg, the Bible says that our sin has made a separation between us and God.
Yeah.
And I know the answer to that, but can you tell us?
That our sin has separated us from God. That didn't separate God from us.
Right.
Notice the language in that verse. So yeah, what did Adam do when he saw his nakedness?
Hid.
He hid from God. He separated himself from God. What did God do? He drew near to Adam while he was in his sin. So absolutely, when our conscience is filled with our sin and our works and our death, we will feel separated from God, and we will even separate ourselves from him. Right?
Yeah.
We will draw away from him.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean he draws away from us.
Right.
It's not God's conscience that got corrupted by sin. It's ours.
Yeah.
God didn't all of a sudden start living by a different belief. How do we know? Because he redeemed man. Why did he redeem man? Because he still believed the same thing he believed in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. He still had his dream for us.
Right.
And himself.
Right.
Yeah.
He still wanted us.
Yeah.
We were still the treasure in the field. We are God's treasure. The Bible says we're his inheritance, and he considers himself made rich in gaining us. We're his treasure. Okay? So our sin separated us from God because we cower away from God in fear. The Bible even says that God has no pleasure when that happens.
Right.
It says whenever somebody cowers away from God in fear, that he has no pleasure in that thing, is what it says. His soul has no pleasure in that thing, is what it says.